There's a particular kind of silence that settles over a house when someone you love is dying slowly. It's not the absence of sound. There's always something. The mechanical hum of medical equipment, the soft shuffle of hired shoes on hardwood floors, the careful, measured breathing of someone rationing their final breaths, like they're running out of currency. My grandmother's house had that silence for 11 months before she passed. I learned to read that silence the way sailors read weather. I learned what it meant when it shifted, when new currents moved through it, when something foreign entered and disturbed its fragile equilibrium. I learned to listen. And in the end, listening saved everything. My name is Catherine Reed, and I am 53 years old. I have spent my entire adult life in academia, 30 years teaching art history at a small liberal arts college in Vermont, the kind of place where autumn leaves fall on Gothic architecture and students still write with fountain pens. I am not dramatic by nature. I do not raise my voice. I have never, in my entire life, caused a scene. But I have learned that quiet women are often underestimated. And underestimation, I discovered, can be the most powerful weapon of all. My grandmother, Eleanor Ashford, was 91 when she died. She had been a force of nature her entire life, a woman who'd built a small textile empire in the 1960s, when women weren't supposed to build anything at all. She'd buried 2 husbands, raised 4 children, and accumulated a fortune that she managed with the same fierce intelligence she'd brought to everything else. When the dementia began to take her, it was like watching a cathedral crumble, stone by stone. First, the small details went. Names of flowers she'd grown for decades, the order of her children's birthdays, the location of light switches she'd used for 40 years. Then the larger architecture began to fail. She forgot my mother had died. She forgot she'd sold the textile company in 1998. She forgot sometimes who I was. But she never forgot that she loved me. Even at the end, when my name had become a ghost she couldn't quite catch, she would take my hand and squeeze it with a pressure that said everything words no longer could. I was the only grandchild who came. My cousins, there were 7 of us in total, had scattered across the country and built lives that apparently couldn't accommodate the inconvenience of watching an old woman die. My mother was her only daughter, dead now 15 years from a heart attack that came without warning on a Tuesday morning in March. My uncles visited occasionally, staying an hour at most, their discomfort with mortality radiating off them like heat. So it was me, just me. Every weekend for 11 months, I made the 4-hour drive from Vermont to her estate in Connecticut, a sprawling Georgian revival that she'd refused to leave, even as the rooms became too numerous for her to remember. I would arrive Friday evening and leave Sunday afternoon, and in between I would sit with her, read to her, brush her hair, and pretend that everything was normal, while the woman who'd taught me to be strong slowly forgot who she was. And I would watch Denise. Denise Calloway arrived in March, 6 months before my grandmother died. She was 44 years old, with credentials that gleamed like polished brass, 15 years of private nursing, specializing in geriatric care, glowing references from families whose names I recognized from charity galas and society pages. The agency that placed her was the best in New England, the kind that served old money and new wealth with equal discretion. She was perfect. That should have been my first warning. There's a particular kind of performance that certain people give when they want something. It's not obviously manipulative. That would be too easy to detect. Instead, it's a sustained excellence, a relentless competence that seems almost inhuman in its consistency. Denise was always prepared, always professional, always exactly what my grandmother needed at precisely the moment she needed it. She was too good, and no one is that good unless they're playing a very long game. I noticed the small things first. The way Denise would position herself between my grandmother and the rest of us during family visits, subtle as a shadow but always present. The way she'd answer questions directed at my grandmother, smoothly redirecting conversations she deemed too confusing for her patient. The way my grandmother's eyes would sometimes flicker with something, fear, confusion, recognition, when Denise entered the room. Then I noticed the isolation. My grandmother's longtime housekeeper, Maria, who had been with her for 23 years, was let go in April. Too many people, Denise explained to my Uncle Richard, who had been designated the family's point of contact for household matters. It's overwhelming for Eleanor. She needs consistency, routine. I can manage the basic housekeeping along with her care. Richard agreed without question. He was a corporate attorney, accustomed to delegating problems to competent professionals and moving on. He trusted the system. He trusted credentials. He trusted that people who presented well were what they presented. I did not share his trust. In May, I arrived for my weekend visit to find that my grandmother's phone had been removed from her bedroom. She was getting confused, Denise said, her voice warm with manufactured concern. She kept trying to call people who've passed. It was upsetting her. In June, the visitor's log, a leather-bound book that had sat in the foyer for decades, recording every person who entered the house, disappeared. Clutter, Denise explained. We're simplifying. In July, I noticed that my grandmother's jewelry box had been moved from her dresser to a locked cabinet in Denise's room. For safekeeping, Denise assured me. She tries to give things away to people who come to the door. Delivery people, gardeners. It's a common symptom. Each change was small. Each explanation was reasonable. Each step moved my grandmother further from the world she'd known and deeper into an isolation that Denise controlled completely. But it was August when I understood the true scope of what was happening. I had arrived late on a Friday, traffic, an accident on I-91. The usual delays that transform a 4-hour drive into 6. It was nearly 10 when I pulled into the driveway, the house dark except for the blue glow of a television flickering in what had once been the library, but had been converted into my grandmother's ground floor suite. I let myself in with my key. I'd had one since I was 18, and moved quietly through the familiar darkness, not wanting to disturb anyone. The house smelled different than I remembered. Not bad exactly, but sterile. Like the particular neutrality of hospital corridors. I was passing the library door, which stood slightly ajar, when I heard them talking. My grandmother's voice was thin, tremulous, but clearer than I'd heard it in months. I don't understand, she was saying. Catherine should have this. She's my Margaret's daughter. She's the only one who comes. And then Denise's voice, patient the way a serpent is patient, coiled and waiting. Eleanor, we've talked about this. Catherine has her own life. She doesn't need the burden of this estate. You've seen how tired she is when she visits. Let me help you. Let me take care of things so she doesn't have to. But the will is fine, Eleanor. Mr. Harmon is coming Monday, remember? We discussed this. You wanted to make sure everything is taken care of. That the house goes to someone who'll actually be here. Who actually loves you. There was a pause. My heart was a stone in my chest. You love me, my grandmother said. It wasn't a statement, it was a question. More than anyone, Eleanor, more than anyone. I stood in that dark hallway, my hand pressed against the wall, and I understood everything. Denise wasn't just a caretaker, she was a predator. And my grandmother, with her failing memory and desperate need for connection in the long hours when no family came, was her prey. I did not confront her that night. I went to the guest room I always used. I lay in the darkness, and I thought about my mother, who would have known exactly what to do. I thought about my grandmother, who had built an empire through strategy, not impulse. I thought about every procedural crime drama I'd ever watched, every true crime documentary, every story I'd heard about elder abuse and contested wills and families torn apart by the manipulation of the vulnerable. And I thought about proof. In the academic world, nothing exists without documentation. Every claim must be supported, every argument evidenced, every conclusion defended against scrutiny. I had spent 30 years building cases out of artifacts and archives, proving intentions through the accumulation of small details that, taken together, revealed larger truths. I would do the same now. The next morning, I went to an electronics store in the next town over and purchased 3 small recording devices. They were the kind used by journalists and students, unobtrusive, long battery life, capable of capturing audio for up to 40 hours before needing to be retrieved. I paid in cash. I kept the receipt. Then I went back to my grandmother's house, and I began to listen. The first device I placed in the library, tucked behind a row of books my grandmother hadn't touched in years. The second went in her bedroom, hidden inside a decorative box on her dresser. The third I kept in my pocket, activated whenever I was in the house, capturing every conversation, every interaction, every subtle manipulation that Denise performed with the precision of someone who had done this before. I did not tell anyone what I was doing, not my uncles, who would have dismissed my concerns as paranoia, not my cousins, who would have asked uncomfortable questions about inheritance and implied that my motivations were mercenary, not the agency that had placed Denise, who would have circled their wagons around their star employee. I told no one because I understood something that the rest of my family did not. The system was not designed to protect people like my grandmother. The system was designed to protect credentials, to defer to professionals, to assume that competence implied integrity. The system would not believe me without proof. So I gathered proof. Over the next 10 weeks, I collected 47 hours of recordings. I documented every conversation in which Denise pressured my grandmother about the will. I captured every instance of isolation, every subtle disparagement of family members, every careful manipulation that chipped away at my grandmother's sense of reality. I recorded Denise telling my grandmother that I only visited out of obligation, that my Uncle Richard thought she was too much trouble, that her grandchildren had asked to be removed from the will because they didn't want to deal with the house. None of it was true. All of it was designed to make my grandmother feel that Denise was her only ally, her only family, her only hope. I recorded Denise intercepting phone calls, telling callers that my grandmother was resting when she was sitting right there, alert and confused about why no one ever seemed to reach her anymore. I recorded Denise coaching my grandmother before the attorney's visit, rehearsing phrases like, "I want Denise to have the house, and she's been like a daughter to me," until they sounded natural, spontaneous, chosen. And I recorded the conversation that would eventually put Denise Calloway in handcuffs. It was a Thursday evening, 2 weeks before my grandmother died. I had come midweek. Unusual for me, but I told Denise I had a conference in Boston and wanted to break up the drive. She hadn't questioned it. By then, she had grown confident, comfortable, certain that she had won. I was upstairs, supposedly resting, but actually sitting in the hallway just out of sight, my phone recording. My grandmother had been having a good day, clearer than most, present in a way that had become rare, and Denise had decided it was time to push for more. "The bank accounts," Denise said, her voice the honeyed patience that had become familiar as a recurring nightmare. "We need to talk about the bank accounts, Eleanor. I thought we settled everything with the will. The will covers the estate, but your liquid assets, the accounts, the investments, those could be tied up for months in probate. You don't want Catherine to have to wait, do you? To deal with all that paperwork? Catherine should have whatever she needs. Of course she should, but wouldn't it be easier if we simplified things? If you added me to the accounts, I could help manage everything now. Make sure the bills are paid. Make sure you're comfortable. And then, when the time comes, I can make sure Catherine gets exactly what she deserves." The way she said deserves, like a blade wrapped in silk. My grandmother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that broke my heart and gave me hope in the same breath. "I don't remember signing anything," she said. "About the will? I don't remember agreeing to give you the house." Denise's laugh was light, dismissive. "Of course you don't, Eleanor. That's why I'm here, to help you remember. You signed the new will in August, don't you recall? Mr. Harmon came, we had tea, you signed the papers. You were so relieved to have it settled. I want to see it. The will, I want to read it." "There's no need for that. It's exactly what you wanted, what we discussed. The house goes to me, because I'm here, because I've dedicated my life to caring for you. And the rest, the investments, the accounts, those go to the family, just like before. Everyone gets what they deserve." Silence stretched between them. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud as a drum in the darkness of that hallway. "I want to call Catherine," my grandmother said finally. "I want to ask her about this." "Eleanor?" Denise's voice hardened, just slightly, a flash of the steel beneath the velvet. "We've talked about this. Catherine is busy. She has her own life. She doesn't need to be bothered with financial details. That's what you have me for. That's what you're paying me for. I'm not paying you to take my house." The silence that followed was different, charged, dangerous. "You're confused," Denise said finally, her voice returning to its practiced warmth. "It's late and you've had a long day. Let's get you to bed and we can talk about this tomorrow when you're feeling clearer." "I'm not confused. I know what I want. And I want to talk to my granddaughter." I heard movement, Denise standing, her shoes on the hardwood. "Eleanor, I need you to calm down. This kind of agitation isn't good for you. Remember what Dr. Thorne said about stress. Give me the phone." "The phone isn't in here. It's charging in the other room. I'll bring it to you tomorrow. Bring it now." "Eleanor, I want the phone now, Denise. I want to call Catherine, and I want to see the will I signed, and I want—" "You want—" Denise's voice was cold now, stripped of all pretense. "You want— Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed for you? What I've given up? 11 months of my life, dealing with your confusion, your incontinence, your endless neediness. I've earned this house. I've earned everything in it. And you're going to sign those bank documents tomorrow, and you're going to stop asking questions, because if you don't—" She stopped. The silence was absolute. "If I don't what?" my grandmother asked. And her voice was clear as glass, sharp as the woman she had been before the disease began its slow theft. Denise didn't answer. I heard her footsteps retreat, heard a door close, heard the click of a lock engaging. She had locked my grandmother in her room. I waited until the house was quiet before I retrieved the recording device from the library and drove to the police station in the next town. I did not go to the local department. Denise had cultivated relationships there, made friends with officers who came to check on that sweet old lady in the big house. I drove 40 minutes to a station where no one knew me, no one knew Denise, and no one would give her the courtesy of a phone call before looking at my evidence. I sat in that fluorescent-lit room with a detective named Sarah Chen, and I played her the recordings. All of them. 47 hours compressed into the 3 that mattered most. The coercion, the isolation, the threat. She listened without interruption. When the final recording ended, she was quiet for a long moment. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. "Since March, maybe earlier. I don't know when she started planning it, but she's been executing it for at least 6 months. And the new will? My grandmother has dementia. She may have signed something, but she wouldn't have understood what she was signing. Denise coached her, rehearsed phrases with her, waited for bad days when she was most suggestible. I have recordings of all of it." Detective Chen nodded slowly. "This is good documentation, Mrs. Reed. Better than most cases we see. But I need to ask, why didn't you come forward sooner? Why gather all this before reporting?" I looked at her, this woman who had chosen a profession of protection, and I told her the truth. "Because no one believes the family in cases like this. We're always suspected of having ulterior motives. Wanting the money, wanting the house, wanting to control the inheritance. But a nurse? A professional. She has credentials, she has references. She has a story that sounds reasonable to people who don't know the details. I needed proof that couldn't be dismissed. I needed her own words." Detective Chen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your grandmother is still alive?" "Yes, for now. The doctors say weeks, maybe less. Then we need to move quickly." We did. The next 72 hours were a blur of legal consultations, court orders, and careful coordination. I learned that Denise Calloway had been investigated twice before, once in New Hampshire, once in Massachusetts, for similar patterns of behavior. Both times, the families had been unable to prove their accusations. Both times, the agencies had quietly transferred her to a new assignment, rather than face the liability of a formal complaint. Both times, wealthy elderly patients had died with wills mysteriously altered in the final months of their lives. She was a professional, all right. She had been doing this for years. The district attorney secured an emergency order to prevent any changes to my grandmother's estate. Adult Protective Services opened an investigation. The original will, the one my grandmother had signed 5 years earlier when her mind was still her own, was retrieved from her attorney's files and confirmed as the controlling document. My grandmother died on a Tuesday morning in September, with me holding her hand and the autumn light falling through the window in golden sheets. Denise was not there. Denise was in custody, charged with elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. The will reading was scheduled for 3 weeks after the funeral in the conference room of my grandmother's attorney, a man named Harold Whitfield, who had served her family for 40 years. Present were my uncles, my cousins, all 7 of them, suddenly available now that there was money to discuss, Harold and myself. Also present, at my request and with the district attorney's approval, were Detective Chen and 2 uniformed officers. The cousins were uncomfortable with the police presence. My uncle Richard, ever the attorney, demanded an explanation. "All in good time," Harold said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything. "Let's proceed with the reading." The will was straightforward. My grandmother had been a practical woman, and her wishes reflected that practicality. The house and its contents went to me, the only grandchild who had been present, who had witnessed, who had stayed. The financial assets were divided equally among her 3 surviving children and their descendants. Charitable bequests went to organizations she had supported for decades. Nothing was unexpected. Nothing was controversial, except, of course, for the people who had expected something very different. Harold paused after reading the final provision. "There is one additional matter," he said. Mrs. Eleanor Ashford left a codicil to her will, recorded and notarized 2 weeks before her death. She insisted it be read aloud at this gathering. He pressed play on a small recorder, and my grandmother's voice filled the room, thin, tremulous, but unmistakably clear. "I am Eleanor Ashford, and I am recording this of my own free will, on this day, September 2nd. I want my family to know that for the past 6 months, I have been the victim of a woman named Denise Calloway. who was hired to care for me, but instead has tried to steal everything I worked my life to build. She isolated me from my family. She told me lies about the people I love. She tried to make me sign documents I didn't understand. And when I resisted, she threatened me. She locked me in my room. She took my phone. She made me believe that no one was coming, that no one cared, that she was all I had. But my granddaughter Catherine knew. Catherine saw what was happening when no one else did. Catherine came every weekend for 11 months, even when I didn't always remember her name. She sat with me, she held my hand, she listened, and she gathered proof of everything Denise did. This codicil confirms that my will of January 2019 is my true and final testament. Any documents signed after March of this year are the product of coercion and fraud and should be disregarded. I want Denise Calloway prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I want my family to know what she did. And I want Catherine to know that I loved her, that I knew she was protecting me, and that I am so proud of the woman she became. This is Eleanor Ashford. This is my voice. This is the truth. The room was silent when the recording ended. My cousins stared at their hands, at the table, at anything but each other. My Uncle Richard had gone pale. The police officers stood quietly by the door, their presence suddenly making sense. Then a voice came from outside the conference room, loud, indignant, demanding. Denise Calloway had arrived. She had posted bail the day before, against the DA's recommendation. She had hired a lawyer who specialized in elder care disputes. She had come to the will reading uninvited, certain that the new will, the one she had coerced my grandmother into signing, would be read, would be honored, would make her wealthy beyond anything she had ever earned. She pushed through the conference room door, her lawyer trailing behind her, and stopped short when she saw the police officers. "What is this?" Her voice was sharp, all pretense of warmth stripped away. "I have a right to be here. Eleanor wanted me to have the house. I have the documents. I have witnesses." Detective Chen stepped forward. "Ms. Calloway, you're in violation of the conditions of your bail. You were ordered to stay away from all members of the Ashford family." "I'm not here for the family. I'm here for what's rightfully mine." "What's rightfully yours," I said, standing from my chair, "is a prison cell." Denise turned to look at me. For months she had looked at me with careful, calculated warmth, the performance of a woman who knew I was the only real threat and was determined to neutralize me through sheer benevolence. Now that mask was gone. What remained was cold and hard and utterly without pretense. "You think you've won," she said. "You think your little recordings matter, but I've done this before. I know how these cases go. The families never win. The courts don't care about recordings made without consent. Your grandmother was demented. Anything she said can be challenged. I have lawyers. I have experts. You have nothing." I reached into my bag and withdrew a folder, thick, meticulously organized, the product of 10 weeks of documentation. "You have nothing," I repeated, "because I have everything." Every recording was made in accordance with Connecticut's one-party consent law. Every conversation was documented, time-stamped, and authenticated. I have expert witnesses prepared to testify about the psychological manipulation techniques you used. I have testimony from Maria Gonzalez, the housekeeper you had fired, about the changes she observed in my grandmother's behavior after you arrived. I have records from the nursing agencies in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, where you pulled this same scheme on 2 other families. But most importantly, I have my grandmother's voice, her own words, her own truth, recorded at a moment when she was lucid, when she understood exactly what you were doing, and when she chose to fight back the only way she could. You underestimated her. You underestimated me. And you underestimated what happens when a woman who has spent her entire life being quiet decides to finally speak. Denise stared at me. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Fear, perhaps, or the realization that her carefully constructed world was collapsing. Then the officers stepped forward. "Denise Calloway, you're under arrest for violation of bail conditions. You have the right to remain silent." I watched them lead her out. I watched her lawyer scramble after them, already on his phone, already calculating how to salvage something from the wreckage. I watched the conference room door close behind them, leaving silence in their wake. My Uncle Richard cleared his throat. "Catherine," he said, his voice strained, "I owe you an apology. We all do. We should have listened. We should have paid attention. We should have—" I held up my hand. "You should have come." He stopped. "Not for the money, not for the house, not for the will. You should have come because she was your mother and she was dying, and she needed her family, and none of you were there. I was. Every weekend. Every month. Through every stage of a disease that stripped away everything she was, piece by piece, I was there. So no, Richard. I don't want your apology. I don't want your guilt. I don't want anything from any of you except the understanding that this house, this estate, this legacy, it isn't mine because I was lucky or because I had a strategy. It's mine because I showed up, because I stayed, because I listened when no one else would. That's what family means. Presence, attention, care. And when someone tries to take advantage of the people we love, we notice, we document, we fight. That's the lesson I want you to take from today. Not that I was clever, that I was there. I gathered my things and walked out of the conference room, past the mahogany walls and the oil portraits of people who had built fortunes and lost them and built them again, past the receptionist who looked up with curious eyes, past the front door and into the autumn afternoon, where the air smelled like dying leaves and new beginnings. The criminal trial took 8 months. Denise Calloway was convicted of elder abuse, fraud, and financial exploitation. She was sentenced to 7 years in state prison. The prosecutor told me it was one of the longest sentences ever given in Connecticut for crimes of this nature. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. But I also felt something else, something quiet and steady, like a flame that had burned down to embers but would never quite go out. I had protected someone I loved. I had spoken truth to a system that preferred comfortable lies. I had stood in the gap between vulnerability and predation and said no, not here, not her, not this time. My grandmother left me more than a house. She left me the understanding that strength doesn't always look like power. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it sounds like silence. Sometimes it lives in the small, steady accumulation of evidence. Proof that something wrong is happening. Proof that someone is watching. Proof that justice might be slow, but it is not dead. I live in that house now. I have kept her garden, her library, her favorite chair by the window, where she used to sit and watch the light change through the seasons. Sometimes, in the evenings, I sit in that chair myself and listen to the silence, a different silence now, free of the tension that had lived in these walls for so long. Maria came back to work after the trial. We don't talk much about what happened, but sometimes she'll pause while dusting a photograph or arranging flowers, and she'll look at me with something like gratitude. I understand. I feel it too. People tell me I was brave. They say I was clever, strategic, impressive in my patience. They make it sound like a movie. The wrong granddaughter who outwits the scheming nurse and saves the day. But that's not how it felt. It felt like fear, like uncertainty, like 1,000 moments when I wasn't sure I was doing the right thing. It felt like loneliness, sitting in that police station at 2 a.m, wondering if anyone would believe me. It felt like grief, knowing that my grandmother was dying and that I couldn't stop it, could only try to protect what remained. Revenge isn't glamorous. It isn't satisfying in the way stories make it seem. It's documentation and patience and the willingness to keep going when everything in you wants to stop, wants to look away, wants to let someone else handle it, but someone else won't handle it. That's what I learned. The systems we trust to protect the vulnerable are filled with gaps, and predators like Denise Calloway spend their careers learning exactly where those gaps are. The only defense is vigilance. The only weapon is truth. I recorded everything. And in the end, the recordings spoke for themselves. 47 hours of a woman's voice revealing who she really was, in her own words, undeniable and damning. My grandmother's voice is on those recordings too, confused sometimes, frightened often, but also, in those final lucid moments, fierce, strong. The woman she had always been, fighting through the fog of disease to tell her truth one last time. I play that final recording sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and the silence feels less like peace and more like absence. I listen to her voice telling me she knew, she understood, she was proud. And I remember what revenge really is. It isn't rage, it isn't destruction, it isn't the satisfaction of watching someone fall. It's remembering who you are. It's protecting what matters. It's standing guard over the people who can't protect themselves and saying, not on my watch. Not while I'm here, not while I'm listening. My grandmother built an empire through patience and persistence, through the steady accumulation of small advantages that eventually became something no one could ignore. She taught me, without ever saying the words, that power doesn't announce itself. It waits, it watches, it listens. And when the time is right, it speaks in a voice that cannot be denied. I was her voice in the end, just as she was mine at the beginning, the woman who taught me to be quiet, to pay attention, to notice the details that everyone else missed. The house is quiet now, the garden grows. The light changes through the seasons, just as it always has. And somewhere, in a prison cell 200 miles away, Denise Calloway is learning what it costs to underestimate a woman who knows how to wait. Some lessons take time. This one took 47 hours, and a lifetime of listening. The autumn light falls golden through my grandmother's windows. I sit in her chair. I close my eyes. The silence is mine now. I have earned it. I have earned it. I have earned it. I have earned it.